My father always taught me that heavy diesel engines never fail without warning. Human beings operate under the exact same laws of mechanical physics. Drop your city down in the comments below, because this story might mirror someone in your own family tree. At 12 minutes past midnight, the crushed cabin of my custom Mercedes sedan smelled like sheared steel, burning wiring and copper. Outside, the torrential Memphis rain hammered against what remained of my windshield while the flashing red and blue lights of Station 4's fire trucks cast long, terrifying shadows across the wet asphalt of Poplar Avenue and East Parkway. Every ounce of my awareness was locked onto the cracked screen of my cell phone resting on the center console between my knees. The glowing red digits stacked up on the glass like compound interest on a debt owed by a man who could not spare even 5 seconds of his evening while his biological father bled out in the wreckage. While firefighters wedged steel pry bars into my driver door to pull my body from the twisted metal, and while my pulse dropped alarmingly inside the screaming ambulance, my son remained entirely silent. It was the freezing, calculated silence of total indifference. I lay strapped tightly to the ambulance stretcher, staring up at the IV bag swinging from the ceiling hooks as the paramedic pressed a gauze pad against my temple. In that 20-minute ride across dark city streets, a lifetime of carefully constructed illusions evaporated into the sterile air. As the founder and chairman of Parker Logistics, I had built a fleet of 400 long-haul diesel rigs from scratch. But I had failed catastrophically at the most important contract of my entire life, the contract of raising a son with genuine human empathy. To him, I was nothing more than an automated teller machine with a pulse, an old corporate chairman obsessed with routine, whose only remaining purpose was to clear his monthly credit card balances. By 1 o'clock in the morning, emergency surgeons had stabilized my internal bleeding, stitched the gash across my scalp, and locked my shattered right arm inside a titanium-reinforced structural brace that extended from my knuckles to my shoulder blade. The rain outside whipped relentlessly against the reinforced hospital glass, blurring the neon lights of downtown Memphis into distant streaks of yellow and red. The screen illuminated with Gary's name, before I could even utter a greeting. The background noise pouring out of the tiny speaker told me everything I needed to know. He was calling from an exclusive overwater bungalow in the Maldives, halfway across the globe, enjoying a vacation with his demanding fiancée, Lucy. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice past the dryness in my esophagus, and whispered that I had just survived a near-fatal intersection smash-up and spent the last hour in trauma surgery. I waited for my son to ask how many bones were broken, or if my spine was intact, or if the doctors expected any internal complications. The very first words out of Gary's mouth were a complaint about the time zone difference. He told me that booking an emergency international flight back to Tennessee would force him to forfeit his return booking and trigger a strict, non-refundable penalty on his resort package. He told me, in a tone that sounded like an annoyed middle manager lecturing a warehouse clerk, that I should just let the night nurses adjust my pain medication and get some sleep. Every syllable Gary spoke felt like liquid nitrogen poured directly across my chest. That specific number echoed inside my ringing ears with the precision of a gunshot. I funded his luxury lifestyle down to the thread. I paid the down payment and monthly maintenance fees on his upscale loft in the trendy South Main district. And now, the very $6,000 of monthly allowance that I had placed in his hands had transformed into his primary justification for leaving me alone in a surgical ward while my body stitched itself back together. The grief rising in my throat was so intense, it temporarily eclipsed the throbbing agony in my broken ribs. I had raised a parasite who calculated every emotional interaction on a ledger of profit and loss. While I had dedicated my entire adult life to building an inheritance that would keep him safe forever, he viewed my eventual death as nothing more than the final, lucrative payout on a long-term insurance policy. If you have ever experienced the crushing realization that someone you sacrificed your own well-being for viewed you purely as a financial resource, take 1 second right now to leave comment number 2 down below. I lay motionless beneath the dim hospital nightlight, my left hand closing into a tight fist against the cotton blanket. I didn't yell across the ocean. In my 40 years of navigating corporate acquisitions and hostile freight negotiations, I learned early on that when a business partner reveals their absolute lack of integrity, arguing with them is a waste of oxygen. The contract between father and son had collapsed completely, and at that exact moment, the weak, indulgent parent inside me died forever. At exactly 3:27 in the afternoon of the following day, the door did not swing open with the timid tap of a visiting neighbor. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped across the threshold, blinking against the fluorescent lights. The man standing inside my room was Turner, my 32-year-old nephew, the only child of my late younger sister, Maggie. A battered yellow hard hat tucked securely under his left arm bore the scuffed logo of Parker Logistics Maintenance Yard No. 2. Unlike Gary, Turner didn't live in a luxury downtown loft funded by my bank accounts. He lived in a modest ranch house near the rail yards and worked 60 hours a week as the master handyman and lead diagnostic foreman for our heavy transport division, keeping 400 freight engines running when the computerized diagnostic tools failed. Years ago, my late sister Maggie and I developed a private secret distress code 3 rapid taps, followed by a long pause designed to alert next of kin whenever real disaster struck. While Gary ignored the ping to order cocktails on the beach, Turner recognized the family signal instantly. He dropped his wrenches, left $1 million transmission overhaul sitting on the shop floor, and sped across county lines through a severe flood advisory, just to ensure I wasn't facing the dark alone. When Turner saw the breathing cannula strapped across my cheeks and the titanium brace locking my right arm from finger to shoulder, he didn't burst into theatrical tears or offer hollow pre-packaged platitudes. I looked down at Turner's hands resting on the metal bed rail. Turner knew absolutely nothing about corporate share distributions, offshore tax shelters, or million-dollar freight contracts. Yet right now, when the chips were down and my mortality was hanging in the balance, he was standing guard by my bedside while my biological son sipped imported cocktails on an island halfway around the world. 31 years ago, on the exact rainy Tuesday when my sister Maggie went into early labor with Turner at a small public clinic on the north side of town, I was sitting 50 miles away in an air-conditioned law office, obsessed with closing a lucrative regional freight distribution contract. I genuinely believed that money could substitute for physical presence. When Gary was a toddler and wanted me to build him a treehouse or take him fishing on the weekends, I handed him expensive mechanical toys while I flew to Chicago for shipping conferences. I had systematically trained my own son to view human relationships as financial transactions, where love was measured exclusively by bank transfers. I looked over at Turner sitting asleep in the folding chair, his head leaning forward against his chest from pure physical exhaustion. This young man had grown up with almost zero financial privilege. In Turner's steady, exhausted features, I saw the exact reflection of Maggie's uncorrupted kindness. The financial report of my life's emotional investments was staring me right in the face, showing a devastating bankruptcy in my biological line and an overflowing wealth of loyalty in the nephew I had kept at arm's length. My silent reflection was interrupted when the heavy door to room 217 clicked open once more. It was Denise, the senior charge nurse for the surgical recovery floor. Without wasting a second, Denise checked my IV drip rate, verified the circulation in my braced right fingers, and then set the stack of insurance pre-authorization documents onto my rolling tray table. 45 minutes, meanwhile, the son whom I had funded for 10 years at a rate of $72,000 annually couldn't spare 2 minutes of his vacation to ensure his father survived the night. I looked at Denise as she finished her checks and nodded my gratitude. The time for passive regret and internal self-pity was officially over. Using my uninjured left thumb, I unlocked my cell phone and dialed the direct private cell number of Ben, the veteran chief financial officer who had managed the internal accounting ledgers of Parker Logistics for over 22 years. I didn't waste time with small talk or pleasantries. Ben, I instructed slowly, ensuring every syllable registered clearly across the line. I want every single supplemental corporate credit card issued under Gary Parker's name frozen and deactivated immediately. Remove his authorized signature from all company fuel accounts and corporate expense accounts. No delays, no exceptions. For 3 seconds, absolute silence hung across the phone line as Ben processed the sheer severity of the order. But Ben knew my voice when I was making a non-negotiable command. The absurd, one-sided contract of transactional affection between father and son officially expired at 1:45 in the morning. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. In corporate logistics, as in family life, every decision to ignore a warning sign compounds the final cost. Before I could close my eyes to catch my first hour of real rest since the accident, my cell phone suddenly buzzed against the bedside tray. I squinted through my good right eye and read the single line of text displayed on the glass. He is requesting emergency medical transcripts from your trauma admission to prove your head injury has rendered you mentally incompetent to run the company. He wasn't just abandoning me in a hospital room to save a $6,000 hotel deposit. He was actively attempting to execute a corporate coup d'etat while I was strapped to a hospital mattress with broken bones. He forgot that the man who built a 400-truck logistics empire from a single used freight rig didn't survive 40 years in the transportation industry by playing nice with mutineers. At 7 o'clock the next morning, when the attending physician walked into room 217 for his morning rounds, I demanded an immediate discharge against medical advice. I ordered Turner to grab my heavy wool overcoat from the hospital closet. He carefully draped the heavy fabric over my shoulders, tucked the oxygen tubing securely into my pocket, supported my uninjured left side with his broad frame, and walked me down the hallway to his grease-stained freight service truck waiting in the damp morning air. I told Turner to point the truck directly toward the historic Peabody Place commercial tower in downtown Memphis, where attorney Arthur Simmons occupied the entire 14th floor. This was the sanctuary where multi-million-dollar commercial destinies were forged, defended, and dissolved with the stroke of a pen. Arthur Simmons, a sharp-eyed legal strategist who had guarded our charters and liability shields for over 20 years, stood up from behind his massive mahogany desk with genuine shock across his features. Without asking unnecessary questions, Arthur immediately instructed his executive secretary to lock the double oak doors leading out to the waiting room and hold all incoming calls. I took a slow, deep breath to steady the sharp stabbing sensation in my lower ribs, looked Arthur dead in the eyes, and spoke with absolute clarity. "Arthur, open your wall safe right now and bring out my last will and testament." He walked across the plush carpet, swung open the concealed steel panel behind an oil painting of the Mississippi River, and spun the combination dial on the built-in wall safe. When I signed that document nearly 2 decades ago, every clause inside it represented my foolish, blind hope in building a multi-generational family legacy. Gary believed that old Will was an impenetrable suit of armor, an eternal guarantee that his Parker bloodline automatically entitled him to the entire empire, regardless of how ruthlessly or indifferently he treated the man who built it. I looked up at Arthur, my voice dropping an octave into a cold, uncompromising register. "We are drafting a brand new, ironclad last will and testament, alongside an immediate corporate share redistribution agreement." We heard the sharp sound of dropped folders clattering onto the hardwood floor of the reception area, followed immediately by the panicked voice of Arthur's executive secretary, speaking through the intercom speaker on the desk. She informed us, her voice tight with alarm, that Gary had just called the front desk from an international line, asking whether I had showed up at the legal offices today. I calmly pressed the intercom button and ordered the secretary to deny all knowledge of my whereabouts and keep the office doors deadbolted. I turned back to Arthur and began dictating the complete redistribution of an estate, valued at over $40 million. First, I ordered the immediate transfer of 70% of the voting stock and commercial assets of Parker Logistics directly to my nephew, Turner. Second, I allocated 20% of the remaining corporate equity into an employee-owned trust fund dedicated to health benefits and retirement matching for our veteran freight drivers and warehouse workers. To Gary, I bequeathed exactly one single asset from the entire Parker estate, the old, aging lake house property situated on the marshy outskirts of North Memphis, along with a sealed red envelope containing a private, handwritten letter from me. Arthur Simmons typed the final clauses into his computer terminal with blinding speed, printed the formal legal documents on heavy, watermarked bond paper, and pushed the fresh last will and testament across the desk toward me. To make the revocation legally unassailable and completely immune to any future probate challenges regarding my mental acuity, I had to execute the signature lines in the presence of two witnesses, Turner and Arthur's senior notary public. But there was a glaring, agonizing physical obstacle between me and justice. My dominant right arm remained completely immobilized inside the heavy surgical brace, bolted from my wrist to my collarbone. I could not flex a single right finger, let alone grip a writing instrument. My left hand had never signed a commercial check, never ratified a union contract, and never guided a vehicle steering wheel. I positioned the gold nib at the top of the signature line on page 1. With every single millimeter the pen moved, blinding bolts of pain shot across my cracked ribs and radiated up into my stitched scalp. Each letter I formed looked crooked, jagged, and rough, but I pressed down with every ounce of willpower left in my body, carving a distinct, undeniable left-handed signature onto the legal parchment. The new last will and testament, alongside the corporate voting redistribution, was officially signed, sealed and stamped by the notary public. If you have stayed with me this far into the story, and you can feel the sheer satisfaction of watching a calculated betrayal meet an unyielding legal defense, please take 2 quick seconds right now to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. A lot of people watch without taking action, but hitting subscribe costs you absolutely nothing and helps us continue bringing you these raw, real-life stories of justice every single week. Gary believed he could manipulate the corporate board and control my destiny from a tropical resort 6,000 miles away. This crooked left-handed signature was Raymond Parker's formal response. Right at that exact second, while the ink on the notary stamp was still drying, my cell phone began vibrating violently across Arthur's mahogany desk. Gary's name flashed across the glass in rapid, persistent pulses. I picked up the device with my left hand and tapped the speakerphone button, fully braced for the arrogant fury waiting on the other side of the connection. Instead, it was shrill, breathless, and laced with raw, unadulterated panic. "What the hell is going on with the accounts?" Gary shouted, his words stumbling over each other in desperate haste. He ran it 3 times, and then the front desk manager literally took a pair of scissors and cut my card in half, right in front of the entire lobby. Lucy is completely speechless. The hotel staff are looking at us like we're common con artists attempting to skip out on our bill. There wasn't a single opening question, inquiring whether I had survived my morning medical evaluation, whether my surgical incisions were clean, or whether I was experiencing any pain from the accident. When I remained completely silent, letting the dead air stretch across the ocean line for 10 full seconds, his panic instantly curdled back into vicious, entitled rage. "I know you're listening. You have absolutely no right to freeze my accounts like this. That money belongs to my future, and my spending over here is critical to maintaining our family prestige in front of international investors." I let him rant, scream, and threaten for 2 full minutes until his breath grew ragged across the satellite connection. Then, leaning my bruised face right up to the microphone, I finally spoke. "I am not speaking with you right now, Gary," I stated slowly, ensuring every syllable dropped like a lead weight into his ear. "There is a very, very big difference between those two things." The line went completely, dead silent. In that single, freezing instant, Gary's brain finally registered the shift in the atmosphere. He was hearing the voice of the chairman of Parker Logistics, the same veteran logistics operator, who had crushed hostile corporate takeover attempts and dismantled predatory freight competitors without blinking an eye for nearly 4 decades. "You made your choice between your father's life and a $6,000 hotel cancellation deposit. Goodbye, Gary." Before he could utter another desperate word or launch another empty threat, I tapped the end call icon and powered the cell phone off completely. The first phase of the correction was complete, but the moment he walked into my hospital room, another devastating legal surprise from Arthur Simmons would already be waiting to turn his arrogant assumptions into ash. Turner sat quietly in the folding metal chair beside my bed, going over maintenance reports on his tablet, while 2 private corporate security officers arranged by Arthur Simmons stood discreetly outside in the hallway. The door to my room didn't just open. It burst inward with such violent force that the brass handle slammed into the drywall with a deafening crack. Gary stood in the doorway, his expensive Italian designer suit severely wrinkled and stained with sweat from the 16-hour emergency flight across 3 continents. Beside him stood his fiancée Lucy, clutching her designer leather handbag like a defensive shield, Her face twisted in a mixture of rage and social disgust as she surveyed the sterile hospital environment. Gary's bloodshot eyes swept past my oxygen monitor, completely ignoring the massive surgical incisions visible along my collarbone, and locked directly onto my face with pure, unbridled entitlement. Do you have any idea what you just put me through over the last 48 hours? You humiliated me right in front of her family's closest business associates. You call Ben right now and unlock my executive accounts, or I am walking down to the courthouse with these medical charts to file for emergency temporary conservatorship before noon. Gary stepped toward the bedside table, extending his right hand to grab my personal cell phone, with the obvious intent of forcing me to dial the accounting department. My nephew stepped out from his folding chair, with the smooth, rapid speed of a seasoned freight mechanic, placing his broad 6'2" frame directly between Gary and my hospital bed. "Get out of my way, you glorified handyman," Gary sneered, pointing a trembling finger at Turner's chest. "You're nothing more than a grease monkey who changes tires in the maintenance yard. I will banish you from every freight yard in this state and make sure you never touch a diesel engine again." That was his next fatal mistake. Turner didn't step backward a single millimeter, Gary gasped, his eyes widening in sudden shock as he felt the crushing, stone-cold power in Turner's grip. He remembered, right then and there, the afternoon in the maintenance yard 3 years ago, when a jammed diesel intake valve trapped a driver's hand, and Turner literally punched through the reinforced steel manifold shroud with his bare fist to release the pressure. Gary tried to wrench his arm free, but Turner held him effortlessly in place, his face completely calm and emotionless. "You're in a surgical recovery room." Attorney Arthur Simmons stepped calmly into room 217 carrying his thick leather briefcase, flanked directly by the 2 private, corporate security officers who took up positions on either side of the entrance. He looked at Gary, who was still rubbing his wrist, where Turner had released him, and spoke with the measured, undeniable precision of a veteran courtroom litigator. "The medical charts you are holding are entirely irrelevant. Immediately following that certification, your father formally executed a complete revocation of his prior estate plan and signed a new last will and testament, alongside a binding corporate share redistribution agreement, approved by our majority stakeholders." Gary froze, his face turning pale as the reality of Arthur's words began to penetrate his arrogance. "What do you mean, share redistribution?" he stammered, looking frantically between me, Arthur, and Turner. "Parker Logistics belongs to me." "Not anymore," Arthur replied coldly, turning the pages of the binder so the signatures were visible. "Under the terms of the new executive trust and voting agreement executed by your father, 70% of the total voting equity and commercial assets of Parker Logistics have been replaced and permanently transferred to your cousin, Turner, who has also been formally appointed by the board as our new chief operating officer and executive vice president. 20% of the remaining corporate assets have been placed into an employee welfare and retirement trust. You no longer hold any shares, voting rights, or employment status within Parker Logistics." Gary reeled backward, as if he had been struck square in the chest with a sledgehammer. Lucy let out a sharp, horrified gasp from the doorway. Without saying a single word to her fiancé, Lucy spun around on her designer heels and walked straight out of room 217, leaving Gary completely alone in the center of the floor. "No, wait, Dad, please," Gary cried out, the arrogant mass shattering into a million pieces as his knees buckled beneath him. He reached up with trembling hands, trying to grab my uninjured left fingers across the bed rail. "I'm your son. I was confused in the Maldives, okay? You can't give my company to Turner." "I'm sorry." I slowly pulled my left hand back out of his reach, resting it calmly across my chest. There was only the quiet, profound clarity of a long overdue correction. "I am finished paying for your attention, Gary," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I used $6,000 every single month to purchase what I thought was familial care, when all I was really doing was funding your entitlement and feeding your arrogance. You are not losing your inheritance today because of Turner. You are losing it because you threw it away with your own choices." Before Gary could attempt another sobbing plea, Arthur Simmons reached into the side pocket of his briefcase and withdrew a sealed, thick red envelope. It was the private, handwritten letter that I had painfully inscribed with my trembling left hand during our morning session at Peabody Place. The final, devastating truth overheard and confirmed from the private secret room document vault behind my home office, where I kept my most sacred family records. I suggest you read it very carefully before you leave this building." Gary picked up the red envelope with shaking, wet fingers. His eyes scanned across the crooked, jagged lines of my left-handed handwriting, and as he read the words, every remaining ounce of breath left his body. "Gary, the $6,000 you received in your checking account on the first of every month for the last 10 years never came from the commercial profits of Parker Logistics. That money came directly from the life insurance annuity left behind by your late Aunt Maggie, the very aunt you always mocked as poor and looked down upon from your downtown loft. I failed her completely, and today when you insulted her only son and tried to destroy the legacy she helped build, her money stops forever." The instant Gary finished reading that final paragraph, he went completely, dead silent. He sat paralyzed on the hospital floor, staring at the crooked handwriting of the father he had discarded, realizing with absolute inescapable horror that the very money he had used to pay for his Maldives resort deposits and luxury dinners was purchased by the life's blood of the humble aunt whose son he had just attempted to ruin. Once Gary discovered the origin of the allowance, his arrogance broke into pieces. His hands dropped to his sides, the letter fluttering onto the floorboards between his shoes. Nobody offered him a handkerchief. Exactly 1 week later, my primary orthopedic surgeon signed my final release orders, and I walked out of Baptist Memorial Hospital for good. Instead, I stood quietly on the wooden rear balcony of my modest, single-story brick home on the north side of Memphis, watching the warm, golden light of the late afternoon sun spread across the sprawling industrial freight yards, along the banks of the Mississippi River. Down below in the paved maintenance yard, Turner stood amidst a crew of 12 master mechanics and diagnostic engineers, pointing toward the open engine bay of our newest, clean energy logistics freight rig. As I watched Turner's steady, broad-shouldered figure moving beneath the evening sunlight, checking oil seals and shaking hands with the drivers, I felt a profound, lasting sense of emotional balance settle deep inside my chest. The financial and moral ledger of my life had finally balanced itself out. Join the Dad's Real Life Revenge community right now by hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the notification bell for more raw, emotional, and authentic stories of family justice every single week. Life is exactly like a long, winding interstate highway. We spend so much of our time speeding forward, chasing money, social status, and corporate prestige that we completely forget to build and protect the fundamental things that actually hold up the roof over our heads. What you truly deserve in this life will eventually find its way right back to your doorstep, whether it is loyalty or consequence. Do not wait until it is too late, like Gary, forced to spend the rest of his years trapped alone inside the cold ruins of his own greed. Treasure the people who stand quietly by your side during the darkest storms of your life, and I will see you all in the very next story.